To discuss that further, we're joined by Marcus Papadopoulos, historian and author and analyst, joining us from London. Also, we have with us Greg Simons, researcher from the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies, joining us from Uppsala. Thank you very much to both of you gentlemen. Let's begin with Mr. Papadopoulos. In the past weeks, first we had the attacks on Nord Stream pipelines, then the blast on the Crimea Bridge, followed by Russian missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. Is this war probably entering a more dramatic phase, in your opinion?
Well, it should be noted, first of all, that the two superpowers, America and Russia, are exceedingly adept and have decades worth of experience in diffusing and resolving tension which exists between themselves. Indeed, there are various channels of communication in existence for political, military and intelligence officials in America and in Russia to communicate with each other. That all said, however, now that the Russian military has moved into the next stage of its campaign in Ukraine, what with partial mobilization in Russia and with attacking the infrastructure of Ukraine, the situation is becoming increasingly worrying, because whilst there is no possibility of an intentional war breaking out between America and Russia, there is, of course, the possibility of an accidental war breaking out, which would result in a conventional war between America and Russia, which would quickly escalate into a nuclear war between Washington and Moscow, which would be catastrophic for mankind. And I do believe that we should ask ourselves the question, why are the Western ruling elites going to such lengths to supply the Ukrainian armed forces with weaponry which could bring about a war between America and Russia? Well, it is certainly not on account of the welfare of the Ukrainian people or on account of democracy, freedom, international law and the United Nations Charter, because the aforementioned things are anathema to Western ruling elites. No, the real reason why the Western ruling elites have flooded Ukraine with billions of dollars and immense amounts of hardware is to preserve their empire in the world. And the Western ruling elites have established and have maintained their empire in the world through abusing, exploiting, pillaging and murdering races across the world. That is the reason as to why the Western ruling elites are supporting the Ukrainian government. As I said, it has nothing to do with the welfare of the population in Ukraine. There is a far bigger objective at play here. And as I just said, it is all about the Western ruling elites preserving their stranglehold on the world.
So, Mr. Simons, Russia has been explicit in its warnings to the West that it will respond, it will retaliate, telling them that they are becoming no direct party in this conflict. Why are the Western capitals ignoring Russia's warnings about their non-stop feeding of arms to Ukraine?
I think they really are quite arrogant, and they believe that Russia is almost on the ropes, because they're believing their own propaganda. And for example, it was just a few days ago they were saying Russia is out of missiles, Russia is running out of this, running out of that. So they believe their own propaganda, and they are playing this very high stakes of chicken. So who blinks first? And they're trying to get Russia to blink first. But I think Russia understands. And I mean, the Western weakness in this is the political aspect. The Western publics are moving further and further away from supporting Ukraine. For example, the vast majority of public in the United States now supports a negotiated peace, not to continue the war. And Biden was desperate enough to go begging OPEC to increase oil production in order to help put that pressure. And OPEC told him, no, they're not going to bear the costs of his, geopolitical, geoeconomic games, which are not intended to retain Ukraine's sovereignty, because that sovereignty is long gone, but to weaken and contain Russia, like they're trying to do with Iran, China, and anyone else that stands up to them.
Okay, so Mr. Papadopoulos, NATO insists that despite being a close partner, Ukraine is an independent country. How independent do you view Kiev and when it comes to deciding how to confront Moscow militarily or whether not to engage in peace talks? Who is calling the shots in Ukraine, and how much influence does the US or NATO have?
Ever since February of 2014, Ukraine has been a vassal state of the United States of America, because in that year and in that month, the legitimate government and the legitimate president of Ukraine was overthrown in a Western engineered coup. So for the last 8 years, the Ukrainian government and the various Ukrainian presidents have taken their orders from principally Washington, but also London and Brussels. And President Zelensky is only an independent president on paper. The reality is that he is servile to the West. He's a puppet of the West. He has very, very little leeway in the decisions that he takes in Ukraine. So when the Russians talk about negotiating with Zelensky, effectively they are talking about negotiating with the West, because, as I said, Zelensky is a puppet. And I would just like to add to the regarding the fake tears of Western politicians and Western mainstream journalists concerning the next stage of the Russian military campaign in Ukraine. Your fake tears do not deceive, do not fool the world. And where were your tears? Where were your fake tears when it came to America's savage and murderous bombing of North Korea, of North Vietnam, of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, of Afghanistan, of Iraq, and of Libya? Because you have never shed any genuine tears or even any fake tears for the people of Korea, of Vietnam, of Serbia, of Iraq, of Afghanistan, or Libya. Indeed, those aforementioned countries, when they were bombed by the Americans, Western mainstream journalists and Western politicians didn't just embrace the bombing, they applauded it, they rejoiced in it. So yes, the war in Ukraine is absolutely horrific, but let no one be fooled by the murderous, by the nefarious nature of Western politicians and Western mainstream journalists. Those people care nothing for mankind, and they care nothing for international law.
So, Mr. Simons, to wrap this up, under what circumstances do you see a light at the end of the tunnel where we might achieve peace?
Well, there is going to be no easy road to peace, because the US wants this war to continue, because they said from the very beginning, or even before the actual fighting began, that they want an Afghanistan scenario in Ukraine to weaken Russia. Nuland said it, Blinken said it, the US Secretary of Defense said it, Austin. What may swing it is the fact that Biden's and the Democrats are getting desperate. They've got the midterm elections coming up, and if things get worse, the Democrats are going to be cleaned out And so it's going to be domestic political pressure, not any clean conscience or anything like that, because Western politicians absolutely lack any kind of conscience or ethics, but the threat of losing power at home.
Thank you very much, Mr. Greg Simons, researcher at the Institute for Russian and Eurasian Studies from Uppsala, and also Marcus Papadopoulos, historian, political analyst, and author from London. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for sharing your thoughts and views with us on this edition of the News Review. And thanks to all of you viewers for watching this edition.